Well, Chancellor, thank you for seeing us today. A busy week ahead of you. I know you won't be able to reveal anything that's in the budget, but if you do, we're happy that you do that. But we'd like to explore your thoughts into what's going to happen, the decisions you're going to be making. Now, we know that you became Chancellor at a very difficult time, and government's borrowings were tens of billions of pounds. So what I'm just wondering, what's going to shape your decision? Do you think government is borrowing tens of billions of pounds because it's overspending or because it's undertaxing?
Well, it's actually a combination of a number of things, but the main reason is because we're not growing. And we need to be growing as an economy. And when your growth slows down, your tax receipts come down. That creates enormous pressure if you want to carry on spending the same amounts that you've been spending previously on things like the NHS. And what I had to do when I arrived in November was stabilise the ship. We had a very worrying situation as far as the markets were concerned. Businesses were worried about whether they could invest for the future. And we have a very big inflation problem, and people needed to see that we had a path to sound money and lower inflation. So that was the job in November. If we want to keep taxes down, as I do very strongly, then we now need to have a path to growth. Not just growth that's bouncing back from a recession, but proper, sustainable, long-term, healthy growth.
Well, then that's good. So Liz Truss was right then. Growth is where we need to go. So then people would question the taxation level and the taxation level of a Conservative government, which would be impeding growth there. So as a Chancellor, are you embarrassed, ashamed that you're here now and we've got the highest levels of taxation in modern history?
It's not what I want at all. But by the way, Liz Truss was right to say that the central question is how we deliver growth. Where I think the mini budget was wrong was to say you can borrow to cut taxes, because that's not sustainable. That's not money that you've actually got. That's money you're borrowing. And so if we're going to cut taxes permanently, then it needs to be a tax cut that we earn through higher growth. And the first step is stability. And for stability, you need responsible public finances. And that's why we took some very difficult decisions. We did increase taxes. We actually cut spending by more than we increased taxes in the autumn statement. So it was a very, very difficult statement. What we now have is a responsible outlook for public finances. The markets have recognised that by bringing down mortgage rates, interest rates, and we're on track to bring inflation down. But if you're saying to me, as a Conservative Chancellor, do I want to bring down taxes? Well, I want to bring down personal taxes because that is at the heart of what being a Conservative is. But I want to bring down business taxes even more.
Well, I can hear a huge sigh of relief across the country as you say that, and living within your means, not spending what you haven't got. And that's why I said, are we overspending or undertaxing? I know, Phil, you're interested in that.
No, I am. I mean, the Treasury is often criticised for being too orthodox in its forecast, in the sense that it believes that if you put taxes up, it will raise more money. If you cut taxes, it will cost money. Do you accept a more dynamic taxation model and accept that if you cut the rate of tax, you can actually gain more tax revenue from it, something that the Treasury have been accused of not believing in?
I do think there are dynamic effects, yes, when you do things like cut taxes. We have to make sure that those commitments are credible, and that means making sure that independent bodies like the Office for Budget Responsibility also accept there's a dynamic effect. And they too have been having lots of discussions with me over the last couple of months as I've been preparing this budget as to what those dynamic effects are. But yes, what we're trying to do is to increase the productive capacity of the economy. And a highly taxed, highly regulated economy has less productive capacity. It means that investment by the private sector is crowded out by the higher taxes that are taken by the public sector. But unfortunately, this is the disappointing news I know for many people, we aren't going to be able to get there in one bound. This is a journey. If I think about what George Osborne did in 2010 when he raised the personal tax threshold, that process started in 2010. In 2022, 12 years later, Rishi Sunak announced as Chancellor a budget that meant for the first time in our history, every person in this country can earn £1,000 a month without paying tax or national insurance. That is a really big step forward in terms of a reduction in the tax burden, but we got there over time.
Just on the Office of Budget Responsibility, there is a concern that they, who are also accused of not having the most dynamic tax model either, that they're in effect the de facto Chancellor, that everything that you do is done to satisfy the Office of Budget Responsibility and their forecasts, rather than doing what you actually genuinely think is the best thing for the country and the best thing for the economy. What would you say to people who are concerned that there's too much focus on what the Office of Budget Responsibility say, whose forecasts, by the way, are lamentable in their accuracy?
Well, their forecasts, in fairness, are about the average amongst forecasters in a period in which no forecasters has done particularly well, because we've had pandemics and Ukraine and energy price shocks. So it's been a difficult period for everyone. I think we need to remember as Conservatives that we set up the Office for Budget Responsibility in 2010. The reason we did it was because we were worried that chancellors were fiddling their own forecasts. They were standing up at budgets saying, I can afford to do this, that, this, that. Mainly we were worried about what Gordon Brown did as Chancellor. And we wanted to stop chancellors finding lots of extra money to spend and putting up taxes more by magically changing their Treasury forecasts. What I would say is that the markets were very clear. Whatever anyone else may think, the markets were very clear. They do trust the OBR. And when the previous Chancellor tried to do a budget without having the OBR looking through the numbers, the markets said that was not acceptable. And as you and I know, someone very close to both of our hearts said, you can't buck the markets. And I think we have to accept the markets want someone independent to look over the Chancellor's maths. And in the end, what the OBR, all they're doing is confirming whether or not we meet the fiscal rules that I have chosen as Chancellor. That's all we're asking them to do. We choose those rules, and they then say whether in their judgment we're meeting them.
Now I want to go back to corporation tax, because there's a lot going on in that space at the moment, particularly the horrifying thought for some of us that it's going to go from 19 to 25%. And I know that you, in your leadership bid, wanted to bring corporation tax down to 15%. So I'm not computing the 25% when you wanted it to be at 15%. And we've heard how people aren't going to invest in the country. We heard AstraZeneca say this, and that was my part of the world, Cheshire. I'm going to say to you, we shouldn't be increasing that. And you're a man who wanted 15%. What's gone wrong? Were you wrong then? Are you wrong now?
Well, I think I was right in what I wanted to do then, and I think what you wanted to do then at that time, Esther, which
I still want to do it.
Yes, which is for Britain to have the most competitive business tax levels of anywhere. So that is fundamentally extremely important, because the Conservative insight is that, you need to grow the economy if you're going to have money to spend on all the things we care about and keep taxes low. And we are fundamentally the party of the economy. I think that if I was going, I'm not going to have another leadership campaign, but let me put it this way, I'll be careful of my words
never
here.
Again. You might do.
No, never again. But if I was going to have my time again, the argument I would have made is that we need to have the lowest effective corporation taxes, because the headline rate, which, by the way, even at 25%, is lower than nearly all our major rivals, France, Germany, and so on. But what actually matters, because a lot of companies are allowed to count their capital expenditure against their corporation tax bill. Now, one of the ways that George Osborne reduced corporation tax headline rates was that he got rid of those capital allowances. But for manufacturing industry, such as AstraZeneca in your part of the world, those capital allowances work. So I would say we do want to bring down our effective corporation tax, the total amount people pay as corporation tax as a proportion of their profits. We do want to bring those down. But as I said before, it's not something we're going to be able to do all in one go.
Well, put it this way: the corporate tax rate, because you're saying, oh, it's good. It's basically you're saying it's a good compared around the world. Well, I'll say that, the rise in corporation tax and the end of the super deduction for plant and machinery means that the UK drops like a stone from having the 10th most competitive rate in the developed world to the 33rd competitive rate, and that's due to the UK-based, US-based tax foundation. So are you happy as the Chancellor to preside over that falling in competitive rates?
I want our tax rates to be the most competitive. I stick to that. It's what I said in the summer. It's what I believe now. As I say, we can't get there all in one go, and stability also matters. A responsible approach to public finances also matters for businesses up and down the country, because without that, you can't have a path to lower inflation. They worry about whether it's possible to invest in the UK. So I need to have a balanced approach to doing this. But if you're saying to me, is it my ambition for us to have the most competitive business tax rates? Do I want to make progress? Yes, I do.
My timing is next week.
But you said you wanted growth. Growth was really important. The Centre for Policy Studies and the Tax Foundation say that the corporation tax increase alone will reduce GDP long-term by 1.2%. And the Bank of England predicts a fall in business investment of 5.5% next year. So that's hardly going for growth, is it? That's doing the exact opposite. That's going for a slower growth.
Well, that is why you and I are both Conservatives, Phil, because we believe in bringing tax rates down. But all I would say is you have to do so in a framework that is responsible for public finances. If you don't, we actually have, unfortunately, a case study of what happens if you don't do that, because that's exactly what happened in the mini budget, where taxes were reduced in a way that, pleased all Conservatives. We were happy to see taxes coming down, but it wasn't in the context that we were able to defend as being responsible with public finances. And the result was that we paid a very, very heavy price as a party, but also for businesses up and down the country, where they suddenly said, what's going on and what's happening in the markets and what's happening to interest rates. So it has to be done in a responsible way.
There's lots of concern in the country, as I'm sure you're aware, about energy prices, about fuel prices, and the fact that the end of the energy price guarantee is on the cards, that there could be a hike in fuel duty. There's been speculation in the media that you may actually do something to continue the energy price guarantee, that you may actually scrap the increase in fuel duty. Can you share with us what your current thinking is on those two issues? Because people are, and businesses are, very concerned about both of those.
If I was going to spill the beans on the budget, Phil, it would be to you. But unfortunately,
not me.
and to you, Esther, both to the dynamic duo. But I'm not actually going to do that. But let me make one point about energy prices, though. What we need is a pathway to permanently low energy prices, where businesses can depend, whatever someone like Putin does in another part of the world, they can depend on stable, clean, green energy. And the key to that is nuclear, because we've now got up to 40% of our energy coming from renewables, including things like wind, which is great. But you can't get to 100%, because there are times when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, even in Britain and even in Yorkshire. And so because of that, you need to have nuclear power. Now, that is a 2-decade-long process. We're aiming for about 25% of our electricity to be generated by nuclear by 2050. It's the right step. I announced in the autumn statement, despite the spending cuts I was announcing, that we would be spending £900 million on Sizewell C going forward. We need to continue with that. That's the long-term answer to businesses worried about energy costs and to families worried about these wild gyrations in their bills.
I think we'd all agree with that. Security, reliability, affordability is key to the energy bills. Now, again, I'm going to go back to how I could help you reduce taxes as quickly as possible and not put the corporation tax. And that's to save you some money, because we can't overspend as Conservative governments. We've got to make sure we don't spend what we haven't got. And one of them has to be by getting rid of that white elephant, which is High Speed 2, which started off at costing 37 billion, now northwards of 150 people. People are working from home, people are doing Zooms online. HS2 seems something that the South seems to think that the North wants, and really the North would sooner have the connection across the North, that sort of, the powerhouse of the North, and we need that train line there. But really HS2 has sucked money out of that. When are you going to stop HS2, save some money, get things right for the North and bring down our taxes?
Well, Esther, I think you and I can agree on many, many things. That is going to be one thing that we never agree on. But one thing I'll tell you why, but one thing I do completely agree with you is the importance of connectivity in the North.
But we're losing it because you're pursuing High Speed 2. We're losing our connectivity.
I don't think it's an either or. I think you can do Northern Powerhouse Rail and make that an exciting project. Let me tell you, though, the core answer as to why it is. If our second cities in the UK were as rich relatively as second cities in countries like Germany, France or Japan, our GDP would be 5% higher, and we would have much more social cohesion. We have a historic problem in this country that wealth and growth and highly paid jobs have been over-concentrated in London and the South East.
Is there a price, though, at which HS2, even you would say, we can't, it's now no longer value for money? Are you determined to build it irrespective of how much the price goes up to?
We have to do it at a reasonable price. But can I just finish my point, Phil? Because it is really important. If you say, why is it that wealth and opportunity are better spread in Japan or Germany than they are in the UK, one of the reasons is because you can go from Osaka to Tokyo for a meeting and back in a day, and you don't have to move to Tokyo to get a well-paid job. You can grow your business in Osaka, and that connectivity is really important way.
We agree with the connectivity. We're saying we need them up the northern towns. We can get to London fast enough. We don't need the train to London. We want to get across the north.
Can we just move on finally to about the pandemic? You were the longest serving Secretary of State for Health. You were chairman of the Health Select Committee. You left a pandemic plan in place, which didn't involve a blanket lockdown. That wasn't what the plan was. Every other countries, Sweden had the same plan. They stuck to their plan. Why do you think the government abandoned the pandemic plan that you left behind, and you seem to also support the government in abandoning the plan that you left behind? So what was so wrong with your plan that it needed to be abandoned? It was, after all, your plan.
Well, I think we all have to be humble about the events of the pandemic, because I don't think we did as well as we could have done as a country. Although in other ways, our vaccine rollout, we were one of the very best in the world, so there's much to be proud of as well. But in terms of preparations, we did prepare exhaustively. Johns Hopkins University in the United States said we had the second best preparations of anywhere in the world. Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, and it is with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that we over-focused on preparing for pandemic flu and not for the type of virus that we actually ended up with, which was a coronavirus.
Which is a flu virus.
It's not. It's a different type of virus, but it spreads slightly more slowly. So you have the incubation period, a longer incubation period, which is why, looking back on it, the approach that I advocated when I was chair of the Health Select Committee was really to follow what they were doing in Korea and Taiwan, where they avoided national lockdowns by having a much more effective test and trace system.
Do you accept that Sweden, which stuck to its pandemic plan and didn't lock down, did better than countries like New Zealand and China that went for a zero infection policy? Do you accept now that Sweden got it right and countries like New Zealand and China got it wrong?
I don't think it was quite so black and white as that, Phil. I think Sweden and the UK, we used the law, Sweden used a voluntary approach, but we had broadly fairly similar levels of compliance with the lockdowns. But in retrospect, I think there's a lot to learn from what Sweden did, but I don't think there was such a huge difference. I think the key thing is that we were the very best in the world when it came to getting a vaccine out of the blocks, getting the population vaccinated, getting back to normal. We did far better than Australia, New Zealand, China. in that respect. But countries like Taiwan and countries like South Korea did better.
Are we going to see you on the Matt Hancock's WhatsApp leaks? Are we going to see correspondence between you and him? Because we've seen how he said he wanted to frighten the pants off people with the pandemic. Are you going to be revealed in any of those WhatsApp messages?
Well, I had WhatsApp exchanges with Matt because he was health secretary and I was chair of the committee. I think they're all pretty boring. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but nothing quite as salacious as some of the things that we're reading.
Have you been shocked, though, by the things that you've read about him saying, that we want to frighten the pants off people? Are you shocked by that strategy, or do you think that was a good strategy that Matt Hancock was? Would you have done the same as health secretary? Would you have wanted to frighten the pants off people as a strategy?
I'm not going to pile into Matt. I've learnt in this job that it in the end, it exposes every last flaw you have when you have a job at a high level in British politics.
That was a very kind answer there. Just one final question. Did you think, when you didn't win the leadership bid, that you would end up being asked to be Chancellor by the person who did win, and did you think you'd still remain there when Rishi became Prime Minister?
I didn't think so, not in my wildest dreams, and to the extent that when I got the text message from Liz Truss asking me to call her, I thought it was a hoax. So it's been a complete surprise to me. It's a total privilege because I set up and ran my own business for 14 years, and now I've got a chance to help other people who want to follow the same path that I did. But I'm also very aware of the challenges. I think I should also say I think it's an incredible privilege to be Rishi Sunak's Chancellor.
Did you think you'd stay there? Did you think you just couldn't have another change of Chancellor, or did you think he wanted you?
I think you'll have to ask him those questions, but what I'd say is that I think it's been a fantastic partnership.
And did you go to Liz Truss and say, Liz, it's time to stand down now as well? Were you one of those voices that went to her in a final question in her final days and hours? No,
I wasn't. I wanted to be loyal to her. She'd appointed me to the job, and to her credit, she agreed to do all the things that I recommended we needed to do to restore stability. At that point, she didn't try and stop them, even though for her politically they were very embarrassing to do.
I want to thank you for your time. I know it's an incredibly busy week. I now know you're racing off to Cabinet, so thank you for your time that you've given to us.
Thank you, Esther. Thanks, Phil.